So over the last decade or so, the South-South cooperation as a resource for a number of developing countries has increased in importance. And we've seen that also in the way in which the international community has engaged with countries involved in South-South cooperation and attempted to bring them in to global discussions on international development. And of course, the most obvious of these has been the discussion around the architecture of international development, highlighted in Busan in 2011 and then what followed. And of course, also very importantly, the what. So what are we going to be doing in international development? And as the Millennium Development Goals reach their target date this year in 2015, of course, the world is engrossed in discussions around the Sustainable Development Goals, and that conversation will be held at the United Nations at the end of September. We've also just come out of a discussion in Addis Ababa around how we finance development, and we see even there the inclusion of both southern providers as well as the private sector in those conversations. The book that the Institute, SAIIA, together with its partners in the Managing Global Governance Network, have produced is the second in a series that looks at the role of development cooperation, of the role of emerging powers in development cooperation. And this particular book looks at the institutional architecture. So we've looked at 9 case studies in the developing world, starting from Latin America and Central America, looking at Colombia, at Brazil, at Mexico, moving to Turkey, to South Africa, and then on to India, China, Indonesia, and Thailand, and exploring 4 key questions in these countries and how they've evolved their agencies. The first was what drove these countries to establish agencies or indeed to establish units within their particular departments. The second one was to explore what the mandates and the guidelines were that they developed in setting up these new institutional mechanisms. The third was really to look at how they engage with the domestic constituencies on this issue, as well as partners and beneficiaries. And lastly, what were the challenges that they've experienced in this process, and what is their strategic vision for these organizations? The interesting thing, of course, is that while there is a great deal of variety within the types of institutions that have been established, as well as the particular types of problems, there are a number of key threads that flow through the case studies that we've explored. The first of those relates, and I suppose that's not uncommon, around human resource capacity. So that's fundamental. The second relates to how they develop their project design and how they are able to evaluate its impact. The next point relates to how they have brought in civil society and private sector involvement into some of these projects. And we know from our experience also of North-South development cooperation that bringing in civil society and the private sector, and certainly consulting them, is a very important aspect of that. And then there is also the issue of how they engage with the beneficiaries to make sure that there is ownership of the particular projects that have been rolled out. And of course, there are challenges around setting up these institutions and designing them in the most effective way to be able to deal with these challenges. This book, of course, doesn't answer necessarily all the questions. It does certainly try to put forward issues that I think are important for other developing economies that are also considering establishing such institutions, or indeed accelerating their South-South cooperation, how they can learn from the experiences of others. And there is also, I think, a very useful section in the book that tries to glean lessons from the experiences of the North in doing development cooperation. They've been doing development cooperation for over 60 years. Sometimes I think we in the South do feel that there are a number of lessons that are not appropriate for the southern environment, but I think it's a very useful conversation to have and to learn from what exactly we can take on board from the experiences of the OECD DAC in executing development cooperation over the last several decades.